Blizzard has been making huge moves with the likes of Season of Discovery, The War Within, and WoW Remix. It's a very exciting time for World of Warcraft. The amount of content available right now just feels insane. I feel like The War Within is offering some promising content, such as delves and much needed quality of life in warbands, and the prospect of a story being told over 3 expansions is incredibly compelling. But the glaring issue still remains for me with retail WoW, and that's new player experiences. This video is a sequel, if you will, to my Island of Irrelevancy video, which you can check out here if you're interested, as I go into a lot more depth regarding the leveling experience. In Island of Irrelevancy, I discussed how poor Chromie Time was, and how disconnected and unfulfilling the storytelling experience was for a brand new player. It's just all over the place, and very confusing. I'm very mindful not everybody cares about the story, but these players do exist, and I feel it is Blizzard's duty to offer a cohesive experience of players who are interested in the lore and want to know what's going on. It's possible Blizzard have potentially found a solution for this. I'll explain the problem first, some of my ideas, and finally what I believe is Blizzard's way of fixing this. Just a quick warning, there'll be brief spoilers for The War Within. To paint a quick picture of this, brand new players to World of Warcraft will start in the Battle for Azeroth expansion until The War Within launches, and then Dragonflight will take its place as the starting experience. I always talk about this from an Alliance perspective, as it's the faction I'm most familiar with. As an Alliance player, you arrive at Kul Tiras with Jaina and you're immediately arrested. At this point, the player hasn't even been introduced to Jaina properly yet, and knows nothing about her. You just arrive at this new continent and you're immediately thrown in jail. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, and you begin to question just how deep does something like this run?
I don't know how, I have no idea why I'm here. Should I, sorry I didn't mean to punch the microphone. Should I keep doing this? Do I keep doing this?
I think as an introduction to modern WoW, BFA is absolutely fine for new players to run around in. It makes more sense from a gameplay perspective than probably any other expansion right now, besides Dragonflight. When Dragonflight becomes the starting experience for new players, this doesn't fix anything narratively. If anything, it makes it more confusing by the time the players get to the War Within. Whilst there may be this historic sword that's been plunged into Silithus for years now, and is seen as a bit of a landmark these days, veteran players experience that happening from their time in Antorus back in Legion, and that's awesome. But outside of watching the cinematic on YouTube, a new player isn't going to have any idea. The same applies with Anduin and everything he's been going through since Shadowlands. If a new player plays through BFA and then goes to Dragonflight, they won't understand why Anduin has drastically changed or why he's struggling so much. You don't actually see him in Dragonflight as it stands. If they jump into the War Within, they won't even know who Khadgar is, let alone care about his potential demise. It makes it increasingly harder for new players to feel any sort of attachment or pull in the story, because it feels as though they're starting the most talked about TV show at Season 6 or 7. I think some WoW players are desensitized to this because, well, that's just the way things are here, but it doesn't make it acceptable. It's not a great selling point to say to your friends, hey, come and play my game, but before you start, make sure you binge watch all of these videos on YouTube and maybe read a couple of these books, just so you know what's going on. No game should be like this. Don't get me wrong, I love WoW lore videos, but you wouldn't buy a game for your PlayStation just to watch the story elsewhere, so why should WoW be any different? We could argue that the story doesn't belong in MMOs, but that hasn't stopped other games from having great success with them. And the Worldsoul Saga is a pretty big statement that Blizzard want World of Warcraft to be a story-driven experience. I think Chromie Time has personally been one of the biggest swings and misses Blizzard has ever had, because the potential with it is incredible. For those unaware, Chromie Time is a system that was implemented to allow people to level new characters in an expansion or timeline of their choosing, from the Burning Crusade all the way up to the Shadowlands. However, brand new players to the game still have to begin in the aforementioned Battle for Azeroth, as Blizzard feel this is the best leveling experience. Chromie Time should never be about just picking your favourite zones to level in, unless of course that's what you want to do, because I can be guilty of that too. It should also serve as a gateway to the past, and allow players to have that expansion experience as best as they can. I think something they could look into is updating the storytelling cinematic at the beginning when you choose your race. This could be modernised into a really epic intro which talks about the history of WoW and what the adventurers have achieved so far. Whilst you are not one of these adventurers, you are now part of a new era and will join the battle in what's to come. In my Island of Irrelevancy video, I spoke to Noble, who suggested that a lot of WoW's retrospective content could appear in a museum, and players could go there and interact with historic artifacts and important elements of the story. NPCs could also show up at certain times of the day and tell stories and interact with each other. He also suggested an in-game codex which could provide description and information on characters, as well as important things, such as Anduin and the Helm of Domination for instance. I think this would be a great idea. I think WoW could also really benefit with something similar to the Unending Journey from Final Fantasy XIV, a place where players could just jump in and watch cutscenes from any expansion. I understand how helpful and important YouTube is, but I'm always going to campaign that everything related to the story should exist inside the game too. I think a big problem that Blizzard are slowly realising is that WoW simply isn't sustainable anymore when just focusing on the latest expansion. The world has gotten too big and is far too empty. Most systems from expansions gone by have been left to rust because there was simply no plan for them after the expansion they were introduced in. Delves is going to be Blizzard's first serious look into providing an evergreen experience. It's a difficult subject because a lot of players won't see or think about these issues simply because it doesn't affect them or they can't relate to it. There can sometimes be a serious lack of empathy in the WoW community, and it's so easy for players to just say, no, things are fine, just because it is for them. It's important to explore and understand experiences for all players, both old and new. I think it's a very ignorant take to say nobody plays WoW for the story, or new players aren't interested in WoW, because that's just not true. Most new players try WoW and leave because the story is so distorted. Make no mistake, WoW is still a huge draw and people are very interested in it. The game isn't friendly to newcomers outside of something like Exile's Reach, which gives you a basic understanding of the game. How many times have you tried to get your friends into World of Warcraft just for them to quit because they don't feel or see what you do? From the add-ons you tell them to download, to the narrative, to the systems. It's important to try and understand how this looks to a new player. This isn't one of those let's dump on WoW videos, and when I make these videos, I always try and be as fair and objective as I can, and try to provide solutions if possible. This is just me wanting WoW to offer a fun experience for everyone, because it's a game that provides so much joy for me, and I want players to feel that way too. I want players to feel like they're going on an adventure, and doing something worthwhile, not just made to feel like the only goal in the game is to achieve max level. I know you can't ever capture these experiences again. You can't kill the Lich King in 2024 and feel the same way as it did back in the day. It's just not possible. But Blizzard should be able to offer the next best thing. My wish in my Island of Irrelevancy video was that the follower dungeons that were introduced in Dragonflight could be a really strong tool for helping new players see a condensed version of an expansion's final raid. I use an example that a player is finishing up their campaign in Northrend. Instead of being yanked out of there at level 60 and fast-tracked into Dragonflight, they now get a showdown with the Lich King, using the follower system with characters such as Tyrion, Garrosh, Varian and Sylvanas, just to make it feel like this is the final word in this story's arc, and this storyline is concluded, and the player can feel somewhat fulfilled. It's mind-boggling to me that players will go through these expansions and not have a conclusion in the story they've been following. I still think this is an idea that Blizzard could look into, but it's a huge undertaking and it's probably not the answer. You're probably thinking that I'm asking for too much, and I agree with you. It's an incredible amount of work. I'm not very hopeful that we'll see any radical changes for a new player experience in the modern game, because I think it's just too big of an undertaking. So what's the fix? I think we're more likely to see retelling of stories in other versions of the game, such as the Mr. Pandaria remix that is coming soon. A lot of people in my Legion video were begging in the comments for Classic Legion, and how they really want to play it again, and I think this is how it will eventually be realised. I think Remix is the future of the past, and whilst it likely won't offer the authentic experience, as we know Mist Remix is made with Dragonflight in mind, it's already so much better than what Chromie Time is offering. Remix is essentially Chromie Time done correctly, besides it being a limited time event, which I can only assume is going to be made permanent after its success, with the likes of Warlords and Legion surely to follow in some format. I love the idea of Remix. It seemed impossible to me that Classic would go beyond Mists, and even Cataclysm seems to be quite a stretch for some players, but I feel every expansion is valid, and for better or worse, is a part of Warcraft's history, and I don't think that Blizzard should run from there, but embrace it. Whilst Classic WoW has been a huge hit, it won't be the answer narratively for some players, because there are players who prefer to play the modern version of the game that they're already familiar with, and this is something Remix can facilitate, as well as continuing to provide incentives for the modern game, such as achievements, transmog and so on. It's great that people can see the story and even the game as it was back then, but it's not a viable option for everyone. Not everybody enjoys the way Classic plays. Remix is a much better formula than Chromie Time and will be a lot less work than redesigning the entire world for new players to try and make sense of everything. That being said, I still think Blizzard should look into modernising the old world all the same, as it's incredibly dated. If remixing expansions can provide a lot of fun, nostalgia, and even a much preferred leveling method for alts, whilst also offering a storytelling experience, it sounds perfect. World of Warcraft is about to head on a journey like never before, releasing 3 expansions that will be woven together to create something truly epic, hopefully. And I really want new players to be able to feel what the veterans feel too, or at least have a better idea of what's happening and who is who, because I'm sure it's going to get nostalgic, and telling people to just read up or watch a bunch of lore videos just seems sad. It's definitely helpful, but as mentioned, I do feel they should be trying to do more for new players. New players feel lost and confused because the game relies too much on players already knowing the established lore. Some of the characters, such as Jaina and Thrall, date back to 2002. Some players think it's time for a clean slate and a reboot. Minds often wander to a WoW 2, which seems inevitable at some point, and I think if or when we get there, Blizzard will have learned a ton of lessons with how to offer a dedicated storytelling experience, as well as maintaining and preserving their features and systems. I don't mean to sound doomer when I mention WoW 2, because the future is incredibly bright for WoW right now, on all fronts. I just think there are some areas of the game that desperately need love. At the end of the day, I think it's all about Blizzard's goals, and if they want to bring new players into the fold with modern World of Warcraft, then it's important they explore all avenues, and constantly keep questioning themselves on how they can make the game more accessible and better for everyone. Whilst I would love to see them address the modern game, I really love the idea of Remix, and it'll be interesting to see how well it is received. As mentioned, I would wager that players interested in the story of WoW are the minority, but they do exist, and frankly, deserve better. We're closing in on 20 years of World of Warcraft, and there's something really sad about new players just caring or understanding about the last 2 or 3. What are your thoughts on the leveling experience in World of Warcraft? Have you tried WoW only to end up quitting? Do you have any ideas on how to improve the storytelling experience for new players, or do you think WoW Remix could be the answer? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.